I'll bring my curtain up pretty soon, eh? Oh, that's right. This teensy little Benny doesn't have a front curtain, does it? Well, that'll make it easier. Oh, I'm getting a vest on, buttoning it up with arthritis. Never get old, Eric. Never get old. Now, there's some things I have to remind this crowd of when they get here tonight. One of them was, the exits, the points of egress are to the right and the left in front of them, and to the right and the left behind them. And the outhouse is outside. If it was inside, we'd call it an in-house, wouldn't we? And the outhouses are integrated and unisex. How progressive. All right, what else? If they go out to the outhouse, well, they should have tried by now. If I can hold it that long, they certainly can. But if they need to, they want to go out the back entrances so as not to let the light flood into the stage and disorient me. And what else? Oh, yes, any bells and whistles they brought along from the carriage, they want to make sure those are muffled so they don't go off and disorient me. Anything else? Oh, gee, how long y'all been there? Well, why didn't you tell me, Eric? Sheesh.
Sorry, Mr. Clemens.
Yes. Oh, well, sorry. I guess I overstepped a little bit. Hold on, folks. I gotta get a little something ready to wet my whistle with. That ought to be enough for the first half hour. I ate some dry rice at dinner last night, and I've been choking on it ever since. So keep my whistle wet. Anyway. All right, well, let's just get this going, Eric. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to present to you a man whose great learning and veneration for truth are only exceeded by his high moral character and majestic presence. I refer in these vague general terms to myself. I consider introductions unnecessary, but if it is the custom to have them, I prefer to do the act myself so that I can rely on getting in all the facts. I was born modest, but it wore off. I was once presented to an audience by a lawyer who kept his hands in his pockets. He introduced me as Mark Twain, a humorist who was really funny, a very rare creature indeed. I was struck speechless by this complimentary thunderbolt. Scarcely in my lifetime had I listened to a compliment so beautifully phrased or so well deserved. But we had a much rarer creature in our midst than a humorist who was really funny. We had a lawyer who kept his hands in his own pockets. Oh, but I do like compliments. We all do. Humorists, burglars, congressmen, all of us in the trade. The plan of the newspaper is good. If you can't get a compliment any other way, pay yourself one. I do that often. I can do it right now. I can state at this moment that there are two men who are most remarkable. Kipling is one, and I am the other one. Between us, we cover all knowledge. He knows all that can be known, and I know the rest. I collect them, too. I have a compliment collection so that I can take them out and look them over every once in a while. And I brought some of them along. Now, the first one of these lies is by my biographer, Albert Bigelow Paine. He's writing 4 octavo volumes about me, and he has been at my elbow for 2.5 years. Now, I just suppose that he does not know me, but he says he knows me. He says, Mark Twain is not only a great writer, a great philosopher, a great man, he is a supreme expression of the human being with every human strength and weakness. Talk about a talent for compression. I've been charged with having no reverence for anything, but I have reverence for a man who could utter the truth like that, as far as it goes. Now here is a compliment of a little Montana girl which came to me indirectly. She was in a room in which there was a large photograph of me on the wall, and after gazing at it steadily for a time, she said, We got a picture of John the Baptist too. Only ours has got more trimmings. I suppose she meant the halo. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you won't mind if I smoke. I believe there is some commandment against smoking during insurrections of this dignified nature, but I am working to remove it. Mind you, I have no objection to abstinence as long as it does not harm anybody. I practice it myself on occasion. I make it a rule never to smoke when asleep. Not that I care for moderation myself. I do it as an example to others and to prove that I am not a slave to the habit. I can give it up whenever I want to. I've done it 1,000 times. The first time I gave it up was when I was a boy, about 10 or 11. They told me I would shorten my life 10 years by smoking, so I got scared and gave it up one day. Then I decided the decade wouldn't be worth living without any smoking in it, so that was the end of that. Another time I joined the Cadets of Temperance and took the pledge. The Cadets of Temperance had a uniform with a bright red sash, and I believe it was that sash which reformed me. I could scarcely wait for the 4th of July so that I might wear it in the parade. But the 4th was too long in coming. I gave up waiting on that and pinned my hopes on old Judge Frazier, who was apparently on his deathbed and was sure to have a big public funeral with a procession. I was deeply concerned about the judge's condition and hungry for news of it. But he had the most discouraging way of fluctuating. He got better, then worse, then better again. It seemed to me he was overdoing the thing. Finally, he was pronounced cured. I felt injured. I handed in my resignation to the Cadets of Temperance and resumed my cigar. And that night, the judge had a relapse and died. I gave it up years later on the advice of my doctor. I had been confined to my bed for several days with a lumbago, and the doctor finally said, "Look here, my remedies haven't got a chance. Consider what they have to fight besides a lumbago. You smoke extravagantly, you eat all manner of things that don't agree with each other's company, you drink 2 hot scotches every night, don't you?" I said, "Yes, I do, but I only drink them as a preventative of toothache." I've never had a toothache, and I don't ever intend to. He said, "That's all right, but we can't make any progress that way. You got to moderate those things." "I can't, doctor." "Why can't you?" "Because I lack the willpower. I can cut them off entirely, but I can't moderate them." He said that would answer. So I cut off all those things for 2 days and 2 nights, and at the end of that time, the lumbago was discouraged and left me. I was a well man again. So I gave thanks and took to these delicacies again. It seemed a good system, so I recommended this remedy to an elderly lady friend of mine. She'd gone down and down to the point where medicines no longer had any helpful effect on her. I told her I could cure her in a week. I said she must give up smoking and drinking and eating and swearing. By the end of the week, she'd be on her feet. Why, she said she couldn't give up smoking and drinking and swearing because she never done any of those things. So there it was. She'd neglected her habits. She was a sinking ship with no freight to throw overboard. Why, just 1 or 2 little bad habits would have saved her, but she was just a moral pauper. When I was a young man studying for the gallows, I went west on the overland stage to seek my fortune in the silver land of the Nevada Territory. Here she comes! Every neck is stretched further, and every eye is strained wider. Away across the endless dead level of the prairie, a black speck appears against the sky, and it is plain that it moves. In a second or two, it becomes a horse and rider, rising and falling, rising and falling, sweeping toward us nearer and nearer, growing more and more distinct, more and more sharply defined, nearer and still nearer, and the flutter of the hoofs comes faintly to the ear. Another instant, a whoop and hurrah from our upper deck, a wave of the rider's hand but no reply, and man and horse burst past our excited faces and go winging away like a belated fragment of a storm. So sudden is it all, and so like a flash of unreal fancy, that but for the white flake of snow left The foam left quivering and perishing on a mail sack after the vision had flashed by and disappeared. We might have doubted whether we had seen any actual horse or man at all, maybe. This was the Pony Rider, the fleet messenger who sped across the continent from St. Joe to Sacramento, carrying letters 1,900 miles in 8 days. Our stay in Salt Lake City only amounted to 2 days, so there wasn't the time to make the customary inquisition into the workings of polygamy and get up the usual statistics preparatory to calling the attention of the nation at large once more to the matter. I had the will to do it. Oh, yes. A man named Johnson told me of a conversation he professed to have had with Brigham Young. He said that Mr. Young told him marriage was a perfect dog's life. You can't economize. It is impossible. Why, the wash bill alone, 984 pieces a week. And cradles, think of it. And soothing syrup, teething rings, and Pabst watches for the babies to play with. And things to scratch the furniture with. And matches for them to eat, and pieces of glass to cut themselves with. Why, the item of glass alone would support your whole family, I dare say. Let me scrimp and squeeze all I can't get ahead. Why, bless you, sir, at a time when I had 72 wives in this house, I groaned under the pressure of keeping thousands of dollars tied up in 72 bedsteads. And I just, when the money ought to have been out of interest, you know, and I just sold out the whole stock, sir, at a sacrifice, and built a bedstead 7 feet long and 96 feet wide. But it was a failure, sir. I could not sleep. It appeared to me that the whole 72 women snored at once. The roar was deafening. And then the danger of it, that was what I was looking at. They would all draw in their breath at once, and you could actually see the walls of the house suck in. And then they would all exhale, and you could see the walls swell and strain, and hear the rafters crack and the shingles grind together. My friend, take an old man's advice and don't encumber yourself with a large family. Don't do it. Take my word for it. 10 or 11 wives is all you need. Never go over. Some instinct or other made me set this Johnson down as being unreliable. On the evening of the 19th day, we came to Nevada and halted at Ragtown on the western edge of the Great American Desert. The country looked something like a singed cat. There wasn't a living creature within 50 miles, except a few stray Indians, some crippled grasshoppers, and 4 or 5 buzzards out of meat and too feeble to get away. There is a popular tradition that the Almighty created Nevada, but when you come to see it, you will think differently. We crossed the Carson River, a moist ditch which is the counterpart of the Erie in all respects, save that the canal is twice as long and 4 times as deep. If it was my river, I wouldn't leave it outdoors nights in this careless way, where any dog can come along and lap it up. I eventually located in Virginia City, which was a good place for a man to lose his religion, if he hadn't left by the time he got there. Virginia had grown to be the liveliest town for its age and population that America had ever produced. The great Comstock Lode stretched its opulent length straight through the town from north to south. Money was as plentiful as dust. There was a glad, almost fierce intensity in every eye, the kind of a look a man has when he is counting his money. There were brass bands, fire companies, banks, hotels, theaters, wide-open gambling places, civic processions, street fights, murders, riots, a whiskey mill every 15 steps, a half-dozen jails, and some talk of building a church. There was no place for a Presbyterian, and I did not remain one very long. Like everyone else, I was smitten with the silver fever. My comrades and I went out prospecting. We climbed the mountainsides among the sagebrush, rocks, and snow. Day after day, we toiled and climbed and searched, and finally, we located a claim. My comrades dug a shaft on it 8 feet deep, and then I went down with a long-handled shovel to throw out the loose dirt. I made the toss, landed the mess just on the edge of the shaft, and it all came back on my head and settled inside my clothes. I climbed out of the hole and walked home. I never ceased to expect that a fortune would someday burst upon me. Meanwhile, I had to eat and save up my strength for it. So I presently went to work as a common laborer in a quartz mill at $10 a week and board. I was the most careful workman they ever had. They said so. I took more pains with my work. I was shoveling sand. Whenever I had a lot of sand to shovel, I was so particular that I would sit down an hour and a half and think about the best way to shovel that sand. And if I could not cipher it out of my mind just so, I would not go shoveling around needless. I would leave it alone until next day. While many a time when I would be carrying a bucket full of sand from one pile to another, 30 or 40 feet off, right in the middle, a new idea would suddenly strike me, and I would carry the sand back and sit down and think about it, and like as not get so wrought up and absorbed in it that I would go to sleep. Why, I always knew there must be some tip-top, first-rate way to move that sand. And at last, I discovered it. I went to the boss and told him that I had got just the thing, the very best and quickest way to get that sand from one pile to the other. And he said, well, I'm awful glad to hear it. You never saw a man so uplifted as he was. I said, what you want now is a cast iron pipe about 13 or 14 feet in diameter and say 40 feet long. And you want to prop up one end of that pipe about 35 or 40 feet off the ground. And then you want a revolving belt with a revolving chair in it. I am to sit in that chair and have somebody down there to fill up the bucket with sand and pass it to me. And as I come around, I am just to soar up there and tip it into the pipe, and there you are. It is as easy as rolling off a log. I only remained in the milling business 1 week. Occasionally I went over to San Francisco on a holiday. On one of those trips I arrived with a very bad cold. A lady at the hotel advised me to drink a quart of whiskey every 24 hours. And another friend recommended exactly the same thing. That made half a gallon. I did. The cold died, and I still live. I eventually left Virginia City and went to San Francisco, where I became unemployed. A pawnbroker took care of what property I had. In those days, I used to meet an old lady on the street every day or so, and one day she stopped me and said, Mr. Clemens, I'm worried about you. I see you marching up and down this street every day with a cigar box under your arm. I'm afraid you are smoking too much. I said, no, ma'am, I'm just moving again. By and by, an old friend of mine, a miner, came down from one of the mining camps of Tulum, California, and I went back with him. We lived in a small cabin on Jackass Hill. It was so named before I got there, there was no connection. And we employed ourselves with what is called pocket mining. Here, the gold is not evenly distributed through the surface dirt as in ordinary placer mines, but is collected in little spots. And they are very wide apart and hard to find. But when you do find one, you reap a rich and sudden harvest. I have known one of those pocket miners to hunt patiently about the hillsides every day for 8 months without finding gold enough to make a snuff box. His grocery bill running up relentlessly all the time, and then find a spot and take out of it $2,000 in 2 dips of his shovel. I have known him to take out $3,000 in 2 hours and go and pay up every cent of his indebtedness, then enter on a dazzling spree that finished the last of his treasure before the night was gone. And the next day, he bought his groceries on credit, as usual, and shouldered his pan and shovel, and went off to the hills hunting for pockets again, happy and content. This is the most fascinating of all the different kinds of mining, and furnishes a very handsome percentage of victims to the lunatic asylum. My mining reminiscences prompt me to call your attention to the recent news dispatch from San Francisco entitled Gold in Solution and the Calistoga Springs. It says that the proprietor of the springs has extracted $1,000 in gold of the utmost fineness from 10 barrels of water during a fortnight by a process known only to himself. This will surprise many people, But it does not surprise me, for I once owned those springs myself. What does surprise me, however, is the falling off in the richness of the water. In my time, the yield was $1 a dipperful. I'm not saying this to injure the property in case a sale is contemplated. I'm only saying it in the interest of history. It may be that this hotel proprietor's process is an inferior one. Yes, that may be the fault. Mine was to take my uncle, I had an extra uncle at the time, and fill him up and let him stand 15 minutes to give the water a chance to settle well, then insert him in an exhausted receiver, which had the result of sucking the gold out through his pores. I have taken more than $11,000 out of that old man in a day and a half. Presently, I found myself in San Francisco again without a cent. Then Lady Luck finally shined on me, and I was given a berth on the Sacramento Union as their special correspondent for the Sandwich Islands. Our first stop was Honolulu. I was naturally anxious to fully explore that dreamy, enchanted place, and they told me the best way to do so was to hire a horse. I'd had some unpleasant experiences with these unpredictable creatures before. In Carson City, I'd once made the mistake of buying a genuine Mexican plug on the advice of a man I later found out was the auctioneer's brother. As soon as I mounted that horse, he put all his feet together in a bunch, lowered his back, and shot me straight in the air about 3 or 4 feet. I came down on the horse's neck, shot up again, came down almost on a high pummel, which was too much variety for me. I decided to get off, but I was in the air again before I could find out which way to go. While I was up that time, somebody sings out, "Don't he buck though?" Then a stranger struck the horse with a leather strap, and when I arrived down again, the genuine Mexican plug was not there. I dug myself out of the ground and made up my mind that if the auctioneer's brother's funeral took place while I was in Carson City, I would postpone all other recreations and attend it. So in Honolulu, I said I preferred a safe horse to a fast one. I asked for an excessively gentle horse, one with no spirit whatsoever. A lame one, if they had such a thing. They showed me an animal who looked as if he wanted to lean up against something and think. So I chose him. I could see he had as many fine points as any other horse, so I hung my hat on one of them behind the saddle, and we started off. The first gate he came to, we started in. I argued the case, and he resisted, but ultimately yielded to insult and abuse. We backed out of that gate, and he steered for another one on the other side of the street. Well, he finally abandoned the gate business and went along peaceably enough, but absorbed in meditation. This began to worry me. I said to myself, this horse is planning some outrage. No horse ever thought over a subject as profoundly as this one is doing now, just for nothing. The more the thing preyed on my mind, the more uneasy I got. I finally dismounted to see if there was anything wild in his eye. I can't tell you what a relief it was to find he was only asleep. I woke him up, and that startled him into a convulsive canter which had 3 short steps and 1 long one, something like the sweeping plunge of a ship in a storm. The saddle was an American saddle with no seat to speak of. One might as well sit in a shovel. And the stirrups are nothing but an ornamental nuisance. Sometimes I got one foot so far through that it took on the nature of an anklet. Other times both feet were through and I was handcuffed by the legs. Even when I was in proper position and carefully balanced on the balls of my feet. Well, the subject is too exasperating to talk about. About noon, I whipped my animated trance alongside a stretch of sandy beach where I had noticed a bevy of nude young native ladies bathing in the sea. This was the sort of local color I was after for my newspaper. So I went down and sat on their clothes to keep them from being stolen and begged them to come out, for it seemed to me the sea was rising. I was satisfied they were running some risk. But they went right on with their sport, swimming races, splashing and tumbling each other about, enjoying themselves tremendously. I stayed there for some time, for I intended to be conscientious about my report to the newspaper. I finally turned around to leave, and the horse was asleep again. It was singular. It proves that there is some difference between the horse and the man after all. You cannot rely on a horse to gather news. Well, look at that, Eric. Didn't even last the first half hour, did it? Don't worry though, folks. I have a very high tolerance. When I came back to San Francisco, I found myself without a job. So I hired a hall and gave a lecture. I've never had to do a day's work since. I had a new career. I went forth upon the public highway with all the other bandits and gave readings from my works. I made the acquaintance of that constant menace to the itinerant lecturer, the local interviewer. It is petrified custom with these people to probe you with personal questions, which you try to answer as conscientiously as you can, and then they run home and prove you. The result is that you do not recognize yourself in print, unless you happen to be an idiot of long standing with no prejudices about it. For years I have tried to outwit these people. One of those villains came to me one day when I was out on a raid. He knocked on my hotel room door and announced that he was connected with the Daily Thunderstorm. I was going to break the chair over him, but he sat down on it before I could go into action. I was not at my best that morning. My powers were somewhat under a cloud, so I decided that I had better try to confuse him. He started it off. He said, "You know, it is the custom now to interview any man who has become notorious." "What do you do it with?" Well, customarily, it consists of interviewing, asking questions, and the interviewed answering them. Will you let me ask you certain questions calculated to bring out the salient points of your public and private life? "I have a very bad memory." "Oh, that's all right. Just so you will try to do the best you can." "I will. I will put my whole mind to it." "Thanks. Now, are you ready to begin?" "Ready." "How old are you?" 19 in June. "Well, I would have taken you to be much older than that." "Thank you very much." "Where were you born?" "In Missouri." "When did you first begin to write?" "In 1836. "Why, how can that be if you're only 19 now?" "I don't know. That does strike you as curious somehow, doesn't it?" "Yes. Who would you say is the most remarkable man you ever met?" "Aaron Burr." "Aaron Burr? But you never could have met Aaron Burr if you were only 19 years now. If you know me better than I do, what do you ask me for?" "Well, it was only a suggestion. How did you happen to meet Aaron Burr?" "I happened to be at his funeral one day, and he asked me to make less noise." "But, good heavens, if you were at his funeral, he must have been dead, and if he was dead, how could he care whether you made a noise or not?" "Oh, he was always a particular kind of a man that way." "Now let me get this straight. You say he spoke to you, and yet he was dead?" "I didn't say he was dead." "But wasn't he?" "Some said he was, some said he wasn't." "What did you think?" "It was none of my business. It wasn't my funeral." "Well, let's drop that. Let me ask about something else. Have you any brothers or sisters?" I think so, yes, but I don't remember." "Well, that is the most extraordinary statement I ever heard. I'm sure you had a brother. Haven't I read that somewhere?" "Oh, yes. Now that you mention it, there was a brother. William. Bill, we called him. Poor old Bill." "Why? Is he dead?" "We never could tell. There was a great mystery about that, you see." "That is sad. He disappeared then?" "Well, yes, in a sort of general way. We buried him."
Buried him without knowing whether he was dead or not?
"Oh, no. He was dead enough, all right. You see, we were twins, defunct and I, and we got mixed in the bathtub when we were only 2 weeks old, and one of us was drowned. But we didn't know which one. Some thought it was Bill, some thought it was me."
What do you think?"
I would give worlds to know. This mystery, this solemn and awful mystery, has cast a gloom over my whole life. But I'll tell you a secret, which I've never revealed to anyone before. One of us had a peculiar mark, a large mole on the back of his left hand. That was me. That was the child that was drowned. Then the young man withdrew. After my adventures out there on the Pacific coast, I came east and joined an excursion to the Holy Land. Everybody was going that year. It was a kind of picnic on a gigantic scale. On my pilgrimage, I made the acquaintance of a young man named Charlie Langdon. He showed me an ivory miniature cameo of his sister one day, and I promptly fell in love with her. I saw her in the flesh for the first time the following December. She was slender, and beautiful, and girlish. She was both girl and woman. 2 years later, we were married. It sounds easy and swift and unobstructed, but that was not the way of it. It did not happen in that smooth and comfortable way. There was a good deal of courtship. There were 3 or 4 proposals and just as many refusals. I was roving far and wide on the lecture beat, but I managed to arrive in Elmira every now and then and renew the siege. Once I dug an invitation out of Charlie Langdon to come and stay a week. It was a pleasant week, but it had to come to an end. But just at the last minute, help and good fortune came from a most unexpected quarter. It was one of those cases so frequent in the past centuries and so infrequent in our day, a case where the hand of Providence was in it. I was ready to leave for New York. I bade goodbye to the family, and Charlie and I climbed into the wagon. We got in the back seat, which, fortunately for me, had not been fastened in its place. Barney, the coachman, touched up the horse with the whip. He suddenly sprang forward, and Charlie and I went over the stern of the wagon backward. I struck exactly on the top of my head. I stood up that way for a moment, then crumbled down to the ground unconscious. It was a very good unconsciousness for the person who had not rehearsed the part. There was nothing the matter with me at all. But Charlie was considerably battered. Yet he was so anxious about me that he forgot about it. The family swarmed out and poured enough brandy between my lips to strangle me and make me bark. But it did not diminish my unconsciousness. I was taking care of that myself. They lugged me into the house, and I recognized that this was a victory. I was there. The hand of Providence was in it. They brought a bottle of some kind of liquid fire whose function was to reduce contusions. I knew that mine would scoff at it. Libby's sister poured this on my head and pawed it around with her hand, stroking and massaging until she got worn out. Then Libby carried on for a while. That was very pleasant. If Libby's manipulations had continued, I should probably be unconscious to this day. It was very delightful, those manipulations. They soothed the fire right out of that painkiller. I got 3 days extension out of that adventure, and it helped a good deal. We became engaged, conditionally. But first, I needed references. I was an almost entirely unknown person from the other side of the continent, and only those people out there on the Pacific coast would be able to furnish me with a character in case I had one. Mr. Langdon asked me for references. I furnished them, and we waited. In due course, the answers came, and I was sent for. The results were not promising. All those men had been frank to a fault. They not only spoke in disapproval of me, they were enthusiastic about it. One of the clergymen prophesied that I would fill a drunkard's grave. It was one of those long-distance prophecies. There being no time limit, there's no telling how long you may have to wait. So far, well. When Libby's father finished reading those letters, there was a good deal of a pause. It consisted largely of sadness and solemnity. I couldn't think of anything to say. Mr. Langdon was apparently in the same condition. Finally, he said, "Who are these people? Haven't you a friend in the world?" "Apparently not." "Then I'll be your friend. I know you better than they do. Take the girl." The engagement ring was plain and of heavy gold, engraved with the date February 4, 1869. A year later, I took it from her finger to prepare her to do wedding service by having the wedding date engraved inside, February 2, 1870. It was never again removed from her finger, not even for a moment. In Italy, when death had restored her vanished youth, and she lay fair and beautiful, and looking as she looked when she was a girl and a bride, they were going to take that ring from her finger to keep for the children. But I prevented that sacrilege. It is buried with her. I've just been reading an article in the newspaper, which is so impressive that I've got to tell you about it. The article speaks with enthusiasm about our nation's railroad system and its splendid record of achievement. It says that the trains only destroyed, 3,070 lives last year by collisions, and 27,260 by running over heedless and unnecessary people at crossings. Now, the company seriously regretted the killing of these people and went so far as to pay for some of them. I think we can all be glad that the railway companies are disposed to do the right and kindly thing without compulsion. I know of one instance which touched me greatly at the time. After an accident, the company sent home the remains of a dear, distant old relative of mine in a basket with a note which read, "Please state what figure you hold them at, and return the basket." There couldn't be anything kindlier than that. I have recently been made a director in an accident insurance company, and when I read about things like that, I'm convinced that there is no field for human effort nobler than the insurance business, especially accident insurance. My home is in Hartford, which, as you know, is a city whose fame as an insurance center has spread to all parts of the world. As a matter of fact, we citizens of Hartford have got a reputation for being a triple band of brothers working sweetly hand in hand. First, the Colt Arms Company, making the destruction of our race easy and convenient. Second, our life insurance companies paying for the victims when they pass away. Third, our fire insurance comrades taking care of their hereafter. The fact is, ever since I've been a director in that accident insurance company, I felt that I'm a better man. Accidents have assumed a kindlier aspect. Distressing ones have lost half their horror. I look upon a cripple now with affectionate interest as an advertisement. I don't seem to care for poetry anymore. I don't care for politics, but there is a charm about a railway collision that is unspeakable. And I've developed a new presence of mind in accidents. Not so long ago, I was at a fire and happened to recognize one of our elderly clients leaning out of a 4-story window calling for help. Everybody in the crowd looked up, but nobody did anything. Nobody had any presence of mind. Nobody but me. I came to the rescue. I yelled for a rope. When it came, I threw one end of it up to the old man. He caught it, and I told him to tie it around his waist. He did so, and I pulled him down. No, there is nothing more beneficial than accident insurance. I've seen an entire family lifted out of poverty and into affluence by the simple movement of a broken leg. I've had people come to me on crutches with tears in their eyes to bless this beneficent institution. In all my experience in life, I've seen nothing so seraphic as the look which comes into a freshly mutilated man's face when he feels in his vest pocket with his remaining hand and finds his accident ticket all right. I may as well say, too, by way of advertisement, that this noble charity to which I have become attached as a director is to be depended on. No man can take out a policy with us and not get crippled before the year's out. There was one poor fellow who had been disappointed so by other companies that he'd grown disheartened. His appetite had left him. He'd ceased to smile. Said life was just a weariness. 3 weeks ago, I got him to insure with us. And now he's the brightest, happiest spirit in the land. Has a good, steady income, a stylish suit of new bandages every day, and travels around on a shuttle. And we've had some of the most unusual cases come into that charity, the kind that never seem to happen the same way twice. There was a poor fellow who got himself killed on the 4th of July. Full of patriotism, he opened his mouth to hurrah, and a rocket went down his throat. Before he could ask for a drink of water to quench the thing, it blew up and scattered him all over. Really now, this is true. I know about it myself. 24 hours after, it was raining buttons recognizable as his on the Atlantic seaboard 1,500 miles away. A person cannot have a disaster like that and be entirely cheerful the rest of his life. I had an uncle on an entirely different 4th of July who was blown up that way, and really, it's trimmed him as it would a tree. Had hardly a limb left on him anyway. All we have now is an expurgated edition of that uncle. We have other testimonials too, such as the case of the poor man who went to visit a dentist, a certain Dr. Tushmaker, to have a tooth out. Tushmaker pulled, the tooth didn't come, but the patient's right leg went up. The dentist said, "What are you doing that for?" "Because I can't help it. You come back in a week and I'll take care of it." During the week, the doctor invented an instrument which combined the properties of the lever, the screw, the wedge, the hammer, and the inclined plane. One turned the crank, and out came the tooth. Its roots were hooked under the patient's right big toe, and his whole skeleton was extracted with the tooth. They sent him home with a pillowcase. Now, let me just read some statistics to you, which ought to prove enlightening. 1 million of us die annually. Out of this million, 10 or 12,000 are shot, stabbed, drowned, hanged, poisoned, or meet a similarly violent death in some other popular way. The Erie Railroad kills from 23 to 46. The other 845 railroads kill an average of 1/3 of a man each. And the rest of that million amounted in the aggregate to the appalling figure of 987,631 corpses die naturally in their beds. You will excuse me from taking any more chances on those beds. The railroads are good enough for me. I'm often asked why I wear this white suit. Well, I travel around a good deal, and I mix with royalty, savages, and common ordinary people. And there's one thing that always struck me wherever I went. Clothes make the man. Naked people have little or no influence in society. Ooh. The ant is strong, but I saw another strong thing where we had not suspected much muscular power before. A toadstool, that vegetable which springs to full growth in a single night, had torn loose and lifted a matted mass of pine needles and dirt of twice its own bulk into the air and supported it there, like a column supporting a shed. 10,000 toadstools with the right purchase could lift a man, I suppose. But what good would it do? One of the results of a long and notorious career is that you receive a great many requests for advice. I am often asked to speak before groups of young people to advise them as to the proper approach to life. And I'm always excited and delighted to do that, for I have some things in my brain which I've often longed to say for the instruction of the young. Just a few simple rules which I want to pass along to you now and suggest that you distribute about the neighborhood. Can I have the young people in the audience raise their hands, please? Anybody who considers yourself young? Yeah, you look pretty young. Raise them high, kids. Okay, now listen up. You always want to start out by saying, "My dear young friends, always obey your parents when they are present." Now, this is the best policy in the long run, because if you don't, they will make you. Am I right? Now, most parents think they know you better than you do, and you can generally make more by humoring that superstition than you can by acting on your own better judgment. Be respectful to your superiors, if you have any, also to strangers, and sometimes to other people. If a person offends you and you are in doubt as to whether or not it was intentional, do not resort to extreme measures. Simply watch your chance and hit him with a brick. That will be sufficient. Then if you find that no offense was intended, come right out frankly and confess yourself in the wrong when you hit it. Acknowledge it like a man. Say you didn't mean to. But always avoid violence. See, in this age of charity and kindliness, the time has gone by for such things. Leave dynamite to the low and unrefined. Go to bed early, get up early. Now, this is wise. Some authorities say you should get up with the sun. Some say get up with one thing and some with another. But a lark is really the best thing to get up with. It gives you a splendid reputation with everybody to know that you get up with the lark. And if you get yourself the right kind of a lark and work him right, you can easily train him to get up by 9:30 every time. Now then, as to the matter of lying, my dear young friends, you got to be very careful about lying. Otherwise, you're nearly sure to get caught. And once caught, you can never again be in the eyes of the good and the pure, what you were before. Now, some authorities say that the young ought not to lie at all. Well, that's putting it pretty strong. Stronger than necessary, I'd say. Still, while I don't go that far, I do maintain, and I believe I am right, that the young ought to be temperate in the use of this great art, until such time as practice and experience have given them that confidence, elegance, and precision which alone can make the accomplishment graceful and profitable. Patience, diligence, painstaking attention to detail, these in time will make the student perfect. Why, you just think for a minute what tedious years of study went into the equipment of that peerless master who was able to impose upon a whole world that lofty and grand maxim, truth is mighty and will prevail. The most majestic compound fracture of fact any of woman born has yet achieved. For the history of the whole human race, as well as each individual's experience, is so thick with evidence that a truth is not hard to kill, but that a lie told well is immoral. Never handle firearms carelessly. The sorrow and suffering that have been caused by the heedless though innocent handling of firearms by the young is simply appalling. I remember a case last summer in the house adjoining ours. There lived a little old grandmother, sweet and gray, one of the loveliest spirits in the land. She was seated at her work one afternoon when her young grandson crept in and took down a battered old gun that hadn't been used for years and was not supposed to be loaded. He pointed it at her, laughing and threatening to shoot. The poor soul ran pleading and screaming towards the door, but as she passed him, he pulled the trigger. Now, he had supposed that gun not to be loaded. And he was right, it wasn't, so there wasn't any harm done. But it's the only case of that kind I've heard of. So for heaven's sakes, don't meddle with old empty firearms. They're among the most deadly, unerring things that have been created by man. You don't have to take any pains with them at all. You don't have to have any sights on the gun. You don't even have to take aim. Just pick out a relative, bang away, and you're sure to get it. Why, a youth who couldn't even hit a cathedral at 30 yards with a Gatling gun can take up an empty old musket and bag his grandmother every time. Why, you just think for a minute what Waterloo would have been if one of those armies had been boys armed with old muskets not supposed to be loaded, and the other army had been composed of their female relations. The very thought of it makes one shudder. There are many sorts of books, but good ones are for the young to read. So be very good. Remember that, my young friends, they are a great and unmistakable means of improvement. So be very careful in your selection. Confine yourselves to The Innocents Abroad, Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, and other works of that nature. I hope you will treasure up these instructions which I've given you as a guide to your feet and a light to your understanding. Build your character, thoughtfully and painstakingly upon these precepts, and by, when you've got it built, you will be surprised and delighted to see how nicely and sharply it resembles everybody else. I hope you were listening, kids. There is a familiar old maxim which assures us that man is the noblest work of God. Who found that out? It is a curious and interesting invention, the human race. Etiquette requires that we admire it, and the pulpit has always been fond of referring to us as the chief love and delight of God. Why, land is just the way I think about it myself, even when dry. And when I'm not dry, even those warm words aren't nearly warm enough to describe what I'm feeling when I'm holding on to something and blinking at myself affectionately in the glass and recollecting that I am it. Oh, it's strange and fine, nature's lavish generosities to her creatures. That is, to all of them except man. For those that fly, she has provided a home which is nobly spacious, a home which is 40 miles high and envelops the whole globe and has not an obstruction in it. For those that swim, she has provided a more than imperial domain, a domain which is miles deep and covers 4/5 of the globe. As for man, she has cut him off with a thin skin stretched over the remaining 1/5. The naked bones stick up through it in most places. On 1/2 of that domain, he can raise snow, ice, sand, rocks, and nothing else. So that man's inheritance really consists of but 1/5 of the family estate. And out of it, he has to grub hard to get enough to keep him alive and provide kings and soldiers and powder to extend the blessings of civilization with. And yet man, in his simplicity and complacency and inability to decipher, thinks that nature regards him as the most important member of the family. In fact, the favorite. It must occur to even his dull head sometimes that she has a curious way of showing it. I have heard it said, and by learned gentlemen, that the world was created for man, that all these millions of years have been just a preparation for him. Well, I don't think we ought to decide too soon about it, not before all the returns are in. Of course, he must have been a fine boy, that first prehistoric man. Just think of the style of him, how he must have lorded it over the other creatures, walking on his hind legs, waving his arms, practicing for the pulpit. Man has just that one stupendous superiority, his imagination, his intellect. It makes him different from all the others. Those earlier animals didn't have it, and the monkey hasn't got it, or he wouldn't be so cheerful. And I've heard people talk about man being adapted to the earth, but I don't know how they arrived at that idea. He can't sleep out of doors without freezing to death or getting rheumatism. He can't keep his nose underwater for over a minute without drowning. He can't even climb a tree without falling out and breaking his neck. He's got to be coddled, housed, bandaged, and upholstered to be able to live at all. He's a regular British Museum of Infirmities. He's always undergoing repairs. A machine as unreliable as he is would have no market at all. The higher animals have few diseases. The main one is old age. But man starts in as a child and lives on diseases to the end as a regular diet. He has mumps, measles, whooping cough, croup, tonsillitis as a matter of course. Then as he goes along, his life continues to be threatened in every corner by coughs, colds, asthma, bronchitis, influenza, pneumonia, carbuncles, and a whole catalog of new ones that haven't even been discovered yet. Why, he's just a basket full of festering corruption, provided for the support and entertainment of microbes. Well, what's his appendix for? It has no value. Its only interest is to lie in wait for stray grape seeds and breed trouble. What's his beard for? All nations persecuted with a razor. But nature always keeps him provided with it, instead of putting it on his head where it ought to be. You seldom see a bald-headed man on his chin, but on his head. A man wants to keep his hair. It's a graceful ornament, a comfort, the best of all protection against the weather. He prizes it above emeralds and rubies, and nature half the time puts it on so it won't stay. Man isn't even handsome as compared with the birds. And as for style, look at the bangled tire. That ideal grace and majesty. Look at it. And then look at man. That poor thing. The animal of the wig, the ear trumpet, the glass eye, the porcelain teeth, and silver windpipe. A creature that is mended and patched up all over from top to bottom. If he can't get renewals of his bric-a-brac in the next world, what's he going to look like? Well, you just have to remember that man was made at the end of the week's work when God was tired. You got some more of this, Eric? I'm afraid I might run out. We are always hearing about people who are going around seeking after truth. I have never seen a permanent specimen. I have seen several entirely sincere people who thought they were permanent seekers after truth. They sought diligently, cautiously, profoundly, with perfect honesty, until they believed they had, without doubt or question, found the truth. That was the end of the search. They spent the rest of their lives hunting up shingles to protect their truth from the weather. From that day forth, with their soldering iron in one hand and their bludgeon in the other, they tinkered its leaks and reasoned with objectors. We all have two opinions, is my opinion. The one private, which we are afraid to express. The other, the one we use. The one we force ourselves to wear to please Mrs. Grundy, until habit makes us comfortable in it, and the custom of defending it presently makes us love it, adore it, and forget how pitifully we came by it. It is our nature to conform. We wait to see how the drove is going, and then go with the drove. A new style in women's dress appears, and the passers-by are shocked, and the irreverent laugh. 6 months later, nobody laughs. Why, if Eve was to come again in her ripe renown and reintroduce her quaint styles, well, we know what would happen. And we should be embarrassed along at first. A look at it in politics. We conform there because we can't bear to be in disfavor. We want to stand well with our friends, to be smiled on and welcomed. We want to hear those precious words, "He's on the right track," uttered perhaps by an ass. But still, an ass of high degree. An ass whose approval is gold and diamonds to a smaller ass, and confers glory and honor and membership in the herd. For these rewards, many a man will dump his lifelong principles into the street, along with his conscience. We have seen it happen. We all do know end of feeling, and we mistake it for thinking. And out of this, we get an aggregation which we consider a boon. Its name is public opinion. It is held in reverence. It settles everything. Some think it is the voice of God. Do I seem to be preaching? It is not in my line. I only do it because the rest of the clergy appear to be on vacation. There is a venerable proverb which says, "Children and fools always speak the truth." The deduction is plain. Adults and wise persons never speak. Once when Mrs. Clemens came by our daughter Susie's room to hear her little prayer before retiring, she noticed the child was troubled. Susie explained that Miss Foote, the governess, had been teaching her about the Indians and their religious beliefs, whereby it appeared they had not only one God, but several. This had set Susie to thinking, and she had stopped praying. Then she qualified this statement by saying that she did not now pray in the same way. Her mother said, "Tell me about it, dear." "Well, Mama, the Indians believed they knew, but now we know they were wrong. By and by it can turn out that we are wrong. So now I only pray that there may be a God and a heaven, or something better." My reverence for this pathetic prayer has grown with the years that have passed over my head since then. Its untaught grace and simplicity are a child's, but the wisdom and the pathos of it are of all the ages that have come and gone since the race of man has lived and longed and hoped and feared and doubted. When I was a boy in Hannibal, we used to spend some part every year on my uncle's farm. I remember the bare wooden staircase in my uncle's house, and the turn to the left above the landing, and the rafters and slanted roof over my bed, and the squares of moonlight on the floor, and the white, cold world of snow outside. I remember the howling of the wind and the quaking of the house on stormy nights, and how cozy and snug I felt under the blankets listening. And I remember how the powdery snow used to sift in around the sashes and lie in little ridges on the floor and make the place look chilly in the morning and curb the wild desire to get up, in case there was any. I remember the raging and the rain on the roof summer nights, and how lovely it was to lie and listen to it and see the white splendor of the lightning and the majestic booming and crashing of the thunder. It was a very satisfactory room. There was a lightning rod which was reachable from the window, an adorable and skittish thing to climb up and down summer nights when there were duties of a sort to make privacy desirable. The life which I led there with my cousins was full of charm, and so is the memory of it yet. I can call back the solemn twilight and mystery of the deep woods, the earthy smells, the faint odors of the wildflowers, the sheen of rain-washed foliage, the rattling clatter of drops when the wind shook the trees, the snapshot glimpses of disturbed wild creatures scurrying through the grass. I can call it all back and make it as real as it ever was, and as blessed. I can call back the prairie and its loneliness and peace, and a vast hawk hanging motionless in the sky with his wings spread wide and the blue of the vault showing through the fringe of his end feathers. I know the taste of maple sap and when to gather it, and how to arrange the troughs and the delivery tubes, and how to boil down the juice, and how to hook the sugar after it is made. Also, how much better hooked sugar tastes than any that is honestly come by. Let bigots say what they will. I know how a prize watermelon looks when it is sunning its fat rotundity among pumpkin vines. I know how to tell when it is ripe without plugging it. I know how inviting it looks when it is cooling itself in a tub of water under the bed, waiting. I know the crackling sound it makes when the carving knife enters its end, and I can see the split fly along in front of the blade as the knife cleaves its way to the other end. I know how a boy looks behind a yard-long slice of that melon, and I know how he feels, for I have been there. I know the taste of the watermelon that has been come by honestly, and I know the taste of the watermelon that has been acquired by art. Both taste good, but the experienced know which tastes best. I know the look of an apple that is roasting and sizzling on the hearth on a winter's evening, and I know the comfort that comes of eating it hot along with some sugar and a drench of cream. I know the delicate art and mystery of so cracking hickory nuts on a flat iron with a hammer that the kernels will be delivered whole. And I know how the nuts in conjunction with winter apples, cider, and donuts make old people's tales and old jokes sound fresh and crisp and enchanting and jumbling even away before you know what went with the time. It was a heavenly place for a boy, that farm of my Uncle John's. In Huck Finn and in Tom Sawyer Detective, I moved it down to Arkansas. It was all of 600 miles, but it was no trouble. It was not a very large farm, 500 acres perhaps, but I could have done it if it was twice as large. As for the morality of it, I cared nothing for that. I would move a state if the exigencies of literature required. Along outside the front fence ran the country road, dusty in the summertime, and a good place for snakes. When they were house snakes or garters, we carried them home, put them in Aunt Patsy's work basket for a surprise. Because she was prejudiced against snakes, and always when she took the basket into her lap and they began to climb out of it, it disordered her mind. She never could seem to get used to it. Her opportunities went for nothing. And she was always cold to bats, too, and could not bear them. And yet I think a bat is as friendly a bird as there is. My mother was Aunt Patsy's sister and had the same wild superstition. Bats are beautifully soft and silky. I do not know any creature that is pleasanter to the touch or is more grateful for caressing if offered in the right spirit. My mother was not a suspicious person, but full of trust and confidence. And when I said, "There is something in my pocket for you," she would put her hand in, but she always took it out again herself. I didn't have to tell her. It was remarkable the way she could learn to like private bats. But I was a good boy, you know. Oh, I was a very good boy. I was the best boy in my school. I was the best boy in that little Mississippi town where I lived. The population was only about 20 million. Yeah, you may not believe this, but I was the best boy in that state. And in the United States, for that matter. But I don't know why I never heard anyone say that by myself. I always recognized it. But even those nearest and dearest to me couldn't seem to see it. My mother especially seemed to think there was something wrong with that estimate. And she never got over her prejudice. And yet I was always reforming. Well, I remember the very first time I stole a watermelon. Stole? Oh, no, I don't mean that. The first time I withdrew a watermelon. Retired it from circulation. The first time I ever extracted a watermelon. There's a phrase I want. It perfectly conveys my idea. Its use in dentistry connotes a delicate shade of meaning I'm looking for. You know, we never extract our own teeth. And it was not my watermelon that I extracted. I extracted that watermelon from a farmer's wagon while he was inside negotiating with another customer. I carried that watermelon to one of the secluded recesses of the lumber yard, and there I cracked it open. It was a green watermelon. Now, do you know, when I saw that, I began to feel sorry. It seemed to me that I had done wrong. I reflected deeply. I reflected that I was young. I think I was just 11. But though immature, I knew I did not lack moral advancement. I knew what a boy ought to do who had extracted a watermelon like that one. I considered George Washington and what actions he would have taken under similar circumstances. And then I knew there was just one thing that was going to make me feel right again inside, and that was restitution. I said to myself, I will do that. And the minute I said it, I felt the great moral uplift that comes to you when you've made a noble resolution. So I gathered up the biggest fragments and carried them back to the farmer's wagon and restored the watermelon. And I made him give me a good one in place of it, too. And I told him he ought to be ashamed of himself, going around working off his worthless green watermelons on trusted purchasers who had to rely on him. I told him if he didn't reform, I'd see to it that he got no more of my trade. Why, that man was as contrite as a revivalist's last convert. He promised he would never again carry another green watermelon if he starved for it. And he drove off, a better man. When I think of what I did for that depraved farmer, and all I got out of it was a watermelon, I remember the Mississippi River. I used to be drowned in it regularly, every summer, and then be fished out and drained out and inflated and set going again by some chance enemy of the human race. But it never seemed to bother my mother. She would only smile and say, "People going to be hanged are safe in water." When I was a boy, there was but one permanent ambition amongst my comrades in our village on the west bank of the Mississippi River. That was to be a steamboatman. We had transient ambitions of other sorts, but they were only transient. When a circus came and went, it left us all burning to become clowns. The first Negro minstrel show that came to our section left us all suffering to try that kind of life. Now and then we had a hope that if we lived and were good, God would permit us to be pilots. These ambitions faded out each in its turn, but the ambition to be a steamboatman always remained. Boy after boy got on the river. By and by, I ran away. I said I would never come home again till I was a pilot and could come in glory. The river was my school. On one trip, I saw a little towhead, a small island half a mile long, which had been formed over the past 19 years. Since there was so much time to spare that 19 years of it could be devoted to the construction of a mere towhead, what was the use, originally, in rushing this whole globe through in 6 days? It is likely that if more time had been taken in the first place, the world would have been made right, and this ceaseless improvement and repairing would not be necessary now. Well, if I have seemed to love my memories of those days on the river, it is no surprising thing, for I love that profession far better than any I've followed since, and I took a measureless pride in it. For this reason, a pilot on the Mississippi in those days was the only unfettered and entirely independent human being that lived on the earth. I had hoped that I was going to follow the river the rest of my days and die at the wheel when my mission was ended. But by and by the war came, and commerce on the river ceased, and my occupation was gone. I had to seek another livelihood. I became a silver miner in Nevada, a gold miner in California, a reporter, a foreign correspondent, an instructional torchbearer on the lecture platform, and I finally wound up a scribbler of books and an immovable fixture among the other rocks in the ring. I went back to the river some few years ago to refresh my memories of it, and I took my wife and little daughter along. The first night out, as we lay silent in our bunks waiting for sleep, we heard the leadsman crying through the night, "More Twain! More Twain!" And my little daughter leaned over to me and whispered, "Papa, don't you hear them calling you out there? Why don't you go out?" Well, maybe I ought to tell you how I stole that name. There was a man by the name of Captain Isaiah Sellers. He was a riverboat pilot, a fine man, a high-minded man who greatly respected both ashore and on the river. He was the patriarch of the craft, the only real and genuine son of antiquity amongst all the other pilots. The old gentleman was not of a literary turn, but he used to jot down brief paragraphs of plain and practical information about the river and sign them Mark Twain, 2 fathoms. And he'd give these paragraphs to the New Orleans Picayune. Thus far, they contained no poison. But the old man's knowledge of the river was so wide and deep that the younger pilots resented it. And they used to chaff these Mark Twain paragraphs with unsparing mockery. It so happened that one of them became the text for my first newspaper article. I burlesqued it broadly, very broadly. I was a cub at the time. I showed my performance to the pilots, and they eagerly rushed it into print. Well, it was a great pity, for it did nobody any worthy service, and it sent a pang deep into the old captain's heart. It laughed at him. It laughed at a man to whom such a thing was new and strange and terrible. I did not know then, though I do now, the suffering that a private person feels when he is for the first time pilloried in print. Captain Sellers did me the honor to profoundly detest me from that day forth. When I say he did me the honor, I'm not using empty words. It was a distinction to be loved by such a man, but it was a much greater distinction to be hated by him. For he loved scores of people, but he didn't sit up nights to hate anybody but me. He never again signed Mark Twain to anything. At the time the telegraph brought the news of his death, I was on the Pacific coast. I was a fresh young journalist and needed a nom de guerre, so I confiscated the Ancient Mariner's discarded one and have done my best to make it remain what it was in his hands. A sign and symbol and warrant that whatever is found in its company may be gambled on as being the petrified truth. How well I have succeeded, it would not be modest of me to say. That was many years ago. Now, I am 70. Yeah, 70. I am old. I recognize it, but I don't realize it. I wonder if a person ever ceases to feel young. I mean, for a whole day at a time. Well, when you get to be 70, actually I'm older than that, but 70 is enough. After that, there was too much risk. When you get to be that age, you are supposed to be able to sit up there on that 7-terrace summit and tell the rest of the world how you got up there. They all do it, you know. All these garrulous old people. They explain the process and they dwell on the particulars with senile rapture. Well, I've been anxious to explain my system for some time, and now I have the right. I think I've achieved my 70 years in the usual way, by sticking strictly to a scheme of life that would kill anyone else. Now, I have just a few simple rules I try to follow. I make it a point never to smoke more than one cigar at a time. I have no other restrictions. Look, I never smoked any cigars with life belts around them either. They were always too expensive for me. I always smoked cheap ones. Relatively cheap, that is. 60 years ago, they cost me $4 a barrel, but my taste has improved lately, and I pay $7 now. 6 or 7? 7, I think. Yes, it's 7, but that includes the barrel. I've never taken any exercise except sleeping and resting. I could never see any benefit in being tired. As for diet, I try to be very strict by sticking to things that don't agree with me until one or the other of us got the best of it. Well, till recently, I always got the best of it myself. But last spring, I did stop frolicking with mince pie after midnight. Until then, I'd always believed it wasn't loaded. But the point I want to make is that you can't reach old age by another man's road. My habits protect my life, but they will probably assassinate you. You got to make up your own rules and then stick to them. That's not as easy as it sounds either, because there's bound to be somebody trying to reform you, trying to take all the pleasure right out of your life and replace it with dreariness. But don't let them. If you can't get to 70 by a comfortable road, don't go. Now it is time to go. I came in 1835 with Halley's Comet. It is coming again pretty soon, and I expect to go out with it. It will be the greatest disappointment of my life if I don't go out with Halley's Comet. The Almighty has said, no doubt, "Here are these two indefinable freaks. They came in together, they must go out together." Oh, I'm looking forward to that. But I cannot let you go without telling you something that is on my heart. You know, I cannot always be cheerful, and I cannot always be chaffing. I must sometimes lay the cap and bells down and recognize that I am of the human race. And I will tell you that I have received in this past year, since my 70th birthday, hundreds of letters from people of all conditions, men, women, and children. And there is compliment and praise, and above all, and better than all, there is in them a note of affection. Praise is well, compliment is well, but affection, that is the last and final, most precious reward that any man can win through character or achievement. And I am very grateful to have that reward.